Welcome to Eternal Wisdom Wealth Podcast.
Most families trying to build wealth are playing the wrong game entirely. They sit down on a Sunday night, open a budgeting app, swear this month will be different, cut the subscriptions, plan the meal preps, and for about 2 weeks, it works. Then the car needs new brakes, the kids need school supplies, a birthday comes up, and just like that, the savings plan collapses again. Here is the uncomfortable truth that is not a character flaw. That is a design flaw. The system most people use to build wealth asks them to fight their own human nature every single day, and human nature wins every time. The families quietly building generational wealth are not more disciplined than you. They just stopped relying on discipline altogether. Today we are breaking down the exact 3-lever system that removes willpower from the equation entirely and replaces it with automation, ownership, and compounding that works in the background while you live your life. By the end of this video, you will have one concrete action you can take tonight that starts the entire machine running. The first lever has one job. Take the money before your brain knows it existed. This is called paying yourself first, and the concept is not new, but most people implement it wrong. Lever 1, automate the steal. They treat it like a suggestion. They move money manually at the end of the month, whatever happens to be left over. That method fails because there's almost never anything left over. Life expands to fill the income available. It always has. The correct implementation is surgical and automatic. The moment your paycheck lands, same day, ideally within the same hour through a scheduled transfer. A fixed percentage moves silently into a separate account before a single bill, grocery run, or impulse purchase can touch it. Not 10% of what is left, 10% of the top, non-negotiable like payroll taxes. Here is the specific setup that works. Open a high-yield savings account completely separate from your checking account. Different bank, if possible. So the friction of transferring it back actually slows you down. Name it something specific. Not savings, call it property fund or asset account. The label matters psychologically. Every time you see it, your brain registers a purpose, not just a number. Then set the automatic transfer for the day after your paycheck arrives, not the same day, because payroll can occasionally run a few hours late, and you do not want a failed transfer. The day after. Set it and genuinely forget it exists. Start at 10%. If that feels impossible given your current expenses, start at 6%. The exact number matters far less than the consistency. A 6% automated transfer that runs untouched for 3 years beats a 20% manual transfer that gets rated every other month. Here's why this works psychologically. You never make the decision to save. You made it once back when you set up the transfer. Every month after that, the money simply disappears before the decision point even arrives. There is no willpower required because there is no moment of temptation. The game is rigged in your favor before it starts. At a median U.S. household income of around $75,000, 10% automation puts $625 a month into your property fund. In 24 months, that is $15,000, enough for a meaningful down payment conversation on a starter investment property in dozens of markets across the country, without a single budget meeting, without skipping a single dinner out. Lever 2, buy the asset that pays you back. This is where most personal finance advice stops being useful. Investor savings is not a strategy. It is a suggestion with no address on it. The specific asset class that has built more middle-class generational wealth than any other, consistently across decades, across markets, is residential real estate, not because it is glamorous, because of how the math actually works. When you buy a rental property correctly, 3 separate financial forces activate simultaneously. First, your tenant pays your mortgage. You borrowed money to buy an asset, and someone else is retiring that debt for you every single month. Second, the property appreciates. Residential real estate in the U.S. has averaged roughly 3 to 4% annual appreciation over the long run. That is before any rent income. Third, you receive cash flow on top of both of those. In a well-purchased property, the rent exceeds the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and maintenance. That surplus is income. 3 wealth-building forces running in parallel. On an asset you bought with automated savings, you barely noticed leaving your account. Now let us talk about what buying correctly actually means, because this is where people get into trouble. The number that matters most when evaluating a rental property is the 1% rule as a quick filter. Take the monthly rent the property can realistically generate and divide it by the purchase price. If that number is at or above 1%, the property warrants a deeper look. A $150,000 property renting for $1,500 a month hits the 1% threshold. A $300,000 property renting for $1,400 a month does not, and in most cases that property will cost you money every month rather than make you money. This filter alone eliminates roughly 70% of the properties most beginners get emotionally attached to. The other number that kills first-time investors is the vacancy and maintenance reality check. A property is not occupied 12 months a year in practice. Budget for 1 month of vacancy annually and set aside 10% of gross rent for maintenance and repairs. Run those numbers before you make an offer, not after. If the cash flow still works after accounting for vacancy and maintenance, you have found a real candidate. Your first property does not need to be impressive. It needs to be functional. A 3-bedroom, 1-bath house in a working-class neighborhood with stable rental demand, and a price point your automated savings can reach within 2 to 3 years is the right first property. Not the lake house, not the downtown condo with the rooftop deck, the boring house on the boring street that a family will reliably rent for years. Once that property is in place, the system upgrades itself. The rent coming in partially replaces the need to rely solely on your paycheck automation. You now have 2 income streams feeding the property fund. The timeline to the second property compresses, the second property accelerates the third. This is not a metaphor, it is arithmetic. Lever 3, let compounding do what you cannot. Here's what nobody explains clearly about compound interest. It is not impressive in year 1, it is barely noticeable in year 3. The people who abandon the system almost always do so right before the curve starts bending upward. Let us run actual numbers so this stops being abstract. You automate 10% of a $75,000 income, $625 a month, into your property fund. After 24 months, you have roughly $15,000 plus modest interest. You use that as a down payment on a $120,000 rental property. The property rents for $1,200 a month. After mortgage, taxes, insurance, vacancy reserve, and maintenance reserve, you net $150 a month in cash flow. That is not life-changing money. That is the seed. You keep the automation running. Now you have $625 from your paycheck plus $150 from the property flowing into the fund every month. $775 total. The timeline to the next down payment just dropped from 24 months to roughly 19 months. Meanwhile, the first property is appreciating. At 3% annually on a $120,000 property, that is $3,600 in equity growth per year. Equity you did not work for, equity the market handed you for simply owning the asset. By month 40, you have 2 properties. The combined cash flow is now $300 to $400 a month on top of your paycheck automation. The fund is filling at nearly $1,000 a month. The third property is 15 months away instead of 24. By year 10, if you have followed this system without any income increases, without any dramatic market appreciation, and with conservatively boring properties, you are looking at 3 to 4 properties with combined equity of $150,000 to $200,000 monthly cash flow that covers a car payment, and then some, and an asset base that is growing whether you log in to check it or not. That is compounding. Not the compounding of a savings account, the compounding of ownership. Equity, building on equity. Cash flow funding more cash flow. Each asset making the next asset easier to acquire. And none of it required a Sunday night budget meeting. The part nobody talks about, what this actually does to your family. The financial numbers matter, but they are not the most important thing happening here. When the system is running, when the automation is set, the first property is generating rent, and the compounding has begun. Something shifts in how you show up at home. The low-grade financial anxiety that most families carry as background noise starts to quiet. Not because every problem is solved, but because the trajectory is no longer dependent on your perfect behavior every single month. Your kids pick up on this. Not from anything you say, from the way you answer when they ask about something they want to do. The way you talk about the future at the dinner table, the way you stop flinching slightly every time an unexpected expense comes up. Security is not just a number. It is a texture to daily life that children absorb and carry into adulthood. The families that build real generational wealth are not handing their children a pile of money. They are handing them a model, a demonstrated proof that wealth is built through systems, not heroics. That is the inheritance that actually compounds across generations. Your one action tonight. Do not try to implement all three levers simultaneously. That is how this becomes overwhelming and nothing happens. Tonight, one thing. Open your banking app, set up an automatic transfer for the day after your next paycheck. Start at 10% or 6% if 10 feels aggressive right now. Send it to a separate account and label that account Property Fund. That is it. That is the whole action. The transfer will happen without you. The balance will grow without you. And 3 to 6 months from now, when you check that account and see a number that surprised you, that is the moment the identity shift happens. You stop being someone who is trying to save and start being someone who owns assets. The oak is already in the ground. The second lever, finding and analyzing your first rental property, that is the next conversation. We will walk through how to find markets, how to run the numbers on a real deal, and how to close your first property without needing to be a real estate expert. That video is already waiting for you. For now, set the transfer, let the system start.